You know, whenever we hear the word the economy, it's easy for our eyes to glaze over, right? We think of charts, graphs, all these abstract numbers. But the truth is, it's really a battleground of ideas. We're talking about competing philosophies that have a huge impact on your job, your savings, the price of literally everything you buy. So let's dive in and unpack the two major playbooks that are constantly fighting for control of the American economy.
I mean, think about it for a second. Your paycheck, the price of groceries. Who's really calling the shots here? Is it the folks in Washington, the CEOs in the boardrooms? Or maybe, just maybe, it's you? Well, the answer is complicated, and it really all comes down to which big economic idea you subscribe to. All right, so let's start by looking at these two dominant visions. I mean, these are the ideas that have shaped American politics for decades, and we're not just talking about dusty old textbooks here. Nope. These are the actual blueprints political parties use for, well, everything, from taxes to spending. At the end of the day, the entire debate really just boils down to one simple question. Should the government get more involved in the economy, or should it get less involved? That's it. On one side, you've got people arguing that the government has to step in to make sure things are fair and stable. And on the other side, you've got the belief that the free market, if you just leave it alone, is the best engine for creating wealth for everyone. Okay, so these two big opposing ideas have names. You've probably heard them before. Supply-side economics versus demand-side economics. The best way to think about them is like two totally different playbooks for winning the exact same game, the game of economic growth. So first up, let's talk about supply-side economics. You might know it by its other name, trickle-down economics. The logic is actually pretty straightforward. The thinking goes like this. If you cut taxes for businesses and wealthy investors, they'll take that extra cash and pour it back into the economy. You know, building factories, hire more people, that kind of thing. This focus on boosting production, the supply of goods and services, is really a cornerstone of the modern Republican Party's platform. Now, the other playbook completely flips the script. It's called demand-side economics, or Keynesian economics. This theory argues that the real engine of the economy isn't the big company, it's you. It's the consumer. The idea is that if people actually have money in their pockets and they're out there spending it, businesses will have no choice but to ramp up production to meet all that new demand. And that's exactly why you often see Democrats pushing for things like stimulus checks or bigger unemployment benefits when the economy's in a slump. It's all about keeping that consumer demand high. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. While you hear politicians on TV arguing passionately for one side or the other, the reality is, well, it's messy. Real-world policy is almost never purely one or the other. In practice, pretty much every administration, regardless of party, ends up using a pragmatic blend of both approaches, picking and choosing whatever tool seems right for the job at the time. All right, so let's get practical. How do these big, abstract ideas actually translate into policies that affect you and me every single day? Well, it all comes down to a few key areas: taxes, rules, and the market. First up, taxes. Look, when you boil it all down, there are really only three main ways to do it. First, you've got a progressive tax. That's where the more you earn, the higher your tax rate is. Then there's a flat tax, super simple, everyone pays the exact same percentage. And finally, you have a regressive tax, which sounds bad, and it means the tax takes a bigger chunk of money from people with lower incomes. And get this, we actually have all three types right here in the US. Your federal income tax, that's progressive. The more you make, the higher your rate. But what about sales tax, the tax you pay at the store? That's actually regressive. Why? Because if you don't make a lot of money, you spend a much bigger percentage of your income on just basic stuff, so that tax hits you harder. And then there's the Social Security payroll tax. That one's also kind of regressive, because you only pay it on your income up to a certain limit each year. Okay, next up is the big one, regulations. This is a classic debate. Generally speaking, liberals look at government rules as a good thing. They're essential for protecting consumers, workers, and the environment from, the worst impulses of a totally free market. Conservatives, on the other hand, tend to see all those rules as red tape that just slows down business, stifles innovation, and hurts economic growth. Okay, but here's the thing. There is a massive reality that looms over all of these debates, and it puts some pretty tight constraints on what either side can actually get done. And that, my friends, is the nation's trillion-dollar tab. Just look at that number, $34 trillion. It's one of those figures that's so huge, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around it. That number represents the grand total of all the money the U.S. federal government has borrowed throughout its entire history. It is a lot. And hey, just so we're all on the same page, it's important to know the difference between the deficit and the debt. Super simple. The deficit is the shortfall in just 1 year. When the government spends more than it collects in taxes. The debt, that's the grand total of all those yearly deficits piled on top of each other. So the big question is, where does all that money actually go? This chart gives us a pretty clear picture, and what you see right away is that the biggest chunks of the pie, we're talking Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, are not things Congress really debates every year. Together, they make up a massive slice of the budget. These are what they call mandatory spending programs, and they are a huge piece of this whole puzzle. And here's the really crucial part. Over 60% of all federal spending is mandatory. It basically runs on autopilot. It's not something Congress votes on each year. It just happens automatically because of laws that are already on the books. And that makes it incredibly difficult to cut spending in any meaningful way unless you're willing to change those massive fundamental laws, which, let me tell you, is politically almost impossible.
So it probably won't surprise you to learn that the two sides see this very differently. Conservatives have traditionally argued that deficits are super dangerous, that they're basically just sticking future generations with the bill. Liberals, on the other hand, are often more comfortable with deficit spending, especially during a downturn, seeing it as a way to make investments that they believe will help the economy grow in the long run.
But here's the uncomfortable reality check for everybody. The national debt has gone up under both Republican and Democratic presidents. Big tax cuts, which have generally happened under Republicans, reduce how much money the government brings in. And big spending programs, often pushed by Democrats, increase how much money the government spends. At the end of the day, both paths have led to the same place, more and more borrowing. Okay, so we've looked at the big theories, we've talked taxes, and we've stared into the abyss of that trillion-dollar tab. So, what does this all mean for you? What's the bottom line here?
All right, here are the key takeaways. Number one, it really boils down to those two main playbooks. Do you boost the supply of goods, or do you boost the demand for them? Number two, these ideas shape every single debate we have about taxes and regulation. Three, that huge national debt and all that mandatory spending put real limits on what's even possible for either side. And finally, and maybe this is the most important one, real policy is always a messy compromise. It's never just pure theory.
So that leaves us with the big question, right? Knowing that there are always trade-offs, that there's no magic bullet. Which ideas should we be using to build our future economy? What's the right mix? That's the conversation. And honestly, that's the debate that's going to define what comes next.